Working from home, you feel so alone. Cabin fever's running high. 5 o'clock comes, it's happy hour, but all you do is sigh. When the cocktail hit the spot, it's time to just relax, mix up a bit of history. Go ahead, put the kids to bed, and please drink responsibly. Join me for happy hour history.
Hey friends, Kim McCann, program developer at Prairie, and also your host for Happy Hour History. In this video series, we're going to be mixing up some historical cocktails and also talking about alcohol-related history. In this series, we're going to use Jerry Thomas's pivotal, seminal bartender's guide. Jerry Thomas was a bartender in New York and collected recipes between 1830 and 1885 and published a book of those gathered recipes in 1887. It truly was, for a lot of bartenders, the Bible of their institution, and it still today contains a lot of cocktails that we still drink. In this first episode, our featured spirit is gin. Now, I'm going to tell you quite honestly, full disclosure, my favorite spirit is gin, but I also understand that it is an incredibly divisive spirit. Generally, people either love it or they hate it, and those folks who hate it almost always say it's because it tastes like a Christmas tree. Well, they're not wrong, depending on what kind of gin they're drinking and how well that gin has been made. Gin is a very old spirit. It's been around since the 15th century, and it originally comes from the Dutch. Now, their word for the juniper tree is jenever, which is where we then get the word for gin. For those folks who don't like gin, you're probably drinking inexpensive gin, or the type of gin you're drinking doesn't suit your palate. Gin, by its classification, is a base spirit that is distilled, infused with botanicals, and then redistilled. The most prominent botanical, in fact, the one that must be used to flavor all gin to be gin, is juniper, or jenever. So that's where we got the word gin. You've probably at some time or another heard someone say that they accomplished something due to Dutch courage. And what you understood contextually is that they had a drink or two before they were able to do that thing. But where does that term come from? In the 1600s, during the 30 Years' War, when British soldiers were fighting on Dutch land, they noticed that a lot of the soldiers were drinking a particular concoction before they went into battle. This concoction was jenever. Those soldiers seemed particularly brave, and so the English thought that it might be a good idea for them to imbibe this jenever as well. They did, and they fell in love with it, and in fact started to drink it before they went into battle. And that is where we get the term Dutch courage. Now, there are several different types of gin, and I'm going to tell you about the main three. The first one is Holland gin. Now, Holland gin is closest to the original jenever, and it is a malted gin, which means that before the spirits are distilled, the grain is allowed to start to ferment, and then it's stopped. So it has that malty flavor, and it's a little spicier. There's also Old Tom gin. Now, in Jerry Thomas's book, we'll see Old Tom gin and Holland gin mentioned often. Old Tom gin was a sweeter version of Holland gin, also unmalted. If you see Old Tom gin, which is making a resurgence in many bartending circles, you'll see that it has an amber color as opposed to being clear like other gins. And that's because Old Tom gin is stored in a sherry barrel or another sweet wine barrel before it is actually bottled. The reason that's done is to pull some of that sweetness and that flavor from the wood, but also it was a means to an ends in England when gin production started there, as a way to transport gin before glass bottles became economical. What's most common in your liquor store is London dry gin. With a London dry gin, you are going to definitely taste that juniper flavor far more forward than in something that is not classified as London dry. If you like something a little sweeter, just look beyond the middle shelf. Oftentimes, a more expensive gin is expensive because it's been carefully curated for its ingredients. In other words, the balance of the botanicals that the grain is infused with is going to be much more pleasing, and that juniper will be far more subtle. Today we're using spirits from Hotel Tango. They are a local distillery and they do really fantastic work. In fact, when all of this pandemic stuff started, Hotel Tango made the decision to halt some of their alcohol production and turn that production over to making hand sanitizer. So they've produced bottles of hand sanitizer, and they also have 5-gallon buckets of this stuff that they have been distributing to businesses that are on the front lines, healthcare workers and things like that. Today we are going to make a Gin Fizz. This is a cocktail that is still around, but it is a little bit different than the classic original historic Gin Fizz, which is what we're going to make today. So the original Jerry Thomas recipe is this. We have 1 teaspoon powdered sugar, 3 dashes of lemon juice, 1 wine glass of Holland gin, ice, and seltzer or Apollinaris water, which is seltzer. It's also really hard to pronounce. We're just gonna say seltzer. Let me say a little something about historical measurements and bartending measurements in general. In Jerry Thomas's recipe, it calls for 3 dashes of lemon juice. Now, a dash is one of those measurements that nobody's really certain about. If you have something like bitters that you're using, any kind of concentrated flavoring, a dash is generally 6 to 8 drops. That equals 1 dash. But a dash itself, like a dash of pepper or a dash of salt, a dash of lemon juice, generally speaking, is anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of a teaspoon. So 3 dashes of lemon juice, that's going to be about 3/4 of a teaspoon of lemon juice. The recipe also calls for 1 wine glass full of Holland gin. In standard terms, a wine glass is measured by 5 standard fluid ounces. So if you go to a bar and you get a glass of wine, you're getting 5 ounces of wine. In the 19th century, when we say wine glass, we're talking about a much smaller glass, something that we might think of as a cordial glass. And so that measurement is actually 2 ounces. So we're going to have 2 ounces of gin instead of 1 wine glass full of gin. Let's make a Gin Fizz. We're going to take our glass and we're going to take our teaspoon of powdered sugar. And then we have our 3 dashes of fresh lemon juice. Now we're going to add our 2 ounces of gin. So we're going to stir that up and get that sugar dissolved. And then we're going to add our club soda or seltzer, tonic, whatever you have. We're going to fill up that glass. And the recipe calls for 1 small piece of ice. I'm going to plop that in. Give another quick stir. And that's Gin Fizz. That's pretty good. I do hope you've enjoyed this first episode of Happy Hour History, and I hope you'll join us next week at the same time when we're going to feature some bourbon and a special recipe straight from Mount Vernon and Martha Washington's kitchen. In the meantime, make some time for yourself. Time to relax. It's okay to have a cocktail and let go of a little bit of the stress.
Make a Zoom happy hour meeting with some friends or FaceTime and just
try to do those things that we're really missing doing. Before we go, I do want to take a moment to say a big thank you to Hotel Tango Distillery. You can visit them. They're offering curbside service, and now more than ever, it's extremely important to support local Indiana businesses. We're all in this together, and we'd all like to come out on the other side. I'll see you next week. Cheers.